a study session of Lakewood City Council to order. First item for discussion is a review of the 21-24 City Council goals and priorities. And for this, we have City Manager John Caulfield and Ms. Kelly Fong.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I think to better facilitate and move this on, I'm just going to turn it right over to Ms. Kelly Fong, who will review the draft and proposed goals for the next 3.5 years. This is an outcome from your last retreat that was held just a few weeks ago. So with that, Ms. Kelly Fong.
Welcome, Shannon.
Well, good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm glad to be here with you tonight. So as the city manager just mentioned, we're going to review the draft goals for 2021 and 2024. Just those goals culminated from the various retreats that the city council members held most recently on May 22nd, but also on March 27th of this year, and in the last year on March 17th. At the most recent City Council retreat, we did a deep dive into the visioning for the city of Lacey and what Lakewood, excuse me, and what Lakewood would look like in the near future. I apologize profusely for that. The city of Lakewood. In particular, we covered elements such as work and economy and livability. And in particular, under livability, we held good discussions on recreation and connectivity. Diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. And then we jumped into a deep dive into looking at goals and goal setting for 2021 and 2024. And again, it was determined by this body to extend it to 2024 to align with the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So you'll look in the packet for you tonight, and there is under attachment A and attachment B, the draft city council goals for 2021 and 2024. One thing that I did want to point out with that draft is there is an addition of a city council sub-strategy under robust and active community, specifically section 6-3C. And this was the addition of another item to encapsulate some of the ideas and discussions that this body had concerning connectivity and neighborhood feel. So that is a brief summary of the retreat from May 22nd. I'd be happy to answer any questions or consider anything as far as discussing goals moving forward.
Questions for Ms. Kelly Fong? Not seeing any hands shoot up.
Mr. Mayor, I'm having trouble with my hands, but
so there you go, Mr. Ranstetter. I see it.
okay, thank you. Okay, Fong, I guess I wanted to just look a little bit closer at the section on public safety. And my concern is that the one of the key elements in the city on public safety is our municipal court. And it seems to me that a set of objectives relating to the court would be appropriate to put in the public safety section. In objective 3-3 that says provide resources to support the health, welfare, and safety of the community. And there's a sub-objective C that support creative criminal justice and alternative diversion programs. That seems a little bit less emphasis than the municipal court should get over the next 3 years. I would really like to see a separate set of objectives with some sub-objectives regarding the court that include expansion and continuation of the Veterans Court, that improving the use of technology in the court to make court services better. And we're faced with the situation of the court responding to looking at, are there other therapeutic courts beyond the Veterans Court? And there is, I think, also the idea that we're going to transition from a court with 2 partner jurisdictions, okay, but that we want to sort of continue that in this situation, and the court, as well as the legal department under public safety, have got to develop some fair, understood, effective, equitable responses with respect to the changes in the drug possession laws. So I think there is a variety of things over there that rise to some levels of priorities over the next 3 years that I think rise to a level above some of the things that we have spelled out here in public safety. But the court, I think, deserves its own set of objectives, in that it is one of the things that having a good municipal court is a definite contributor to Lakewood being a safe city. I didn't come with a draft section or something, but I sort of would think that that we could maybe in the next week look at putting something in draft.
Anyone else? I have a comment on that. I wouldn't have any problem putting in something regarding supporting the expansion of opportunities for therapeutic courts and advanced technology for the courts. When it gets to telling them what to do, either administratively or with respect to a particular offense like drug possession, it's pretty touchy because it's a separate branch of government, even though it's an appointed position within the city of Lakewood. So I'd be real careful with respect to that aspect of it.
I can see that nuance, and wouldn't necessarily want to go into priorities being directive, but more indicating the things that the directions that the court would take that we as the council are supportive of, such as the technology, therapeutic courts, and continuing to be partners with other municipalities in that branch of government.
Anyone else have any comments? Well, Ms. Kelly Fong, looks like you have gathered the consensus of the group successfully. Thank you for all your assistance on this.
Happy to do it.
And just make sure you wear your Lakewood uniform when you come back. Mr. Caulfield.
Sorry, Mayor. So Mayor, is there consensus to move forward with drafting again some policy language regarding Councilmember Branstedter's and your comments and suggestions from the full council.
Getting head nods, thumbs up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
All right. Well, thanks again, Shannon, and we hope to see you again as long as you have plenty of dots for us to put on things.
I don't think I had you dot this time, Mayor Anderson, but next time I certainly will.
We'll feed you. We'll feed you if you do it. We'll call it dots for donuts.
Well, I always work for donuts.
Thanks
Well,
again.
thank you again for having me, and we'll get that language incorporated into the draft that comes before you next time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to Partners for Parks Barn Restoration Feasibility Study update. And for this, we have Dave Betts, Al Howe, and Emily Happy.
Mayor Anderson, we have Mr. Howe with us and Ms. Dodsworth. The other
All right.
individuals have not logged into the meeting yet.
And we'll see him at 7, I guess. All right, who leads off here? Ms. Dodsworth or Mr. Howe?
Well, I'll jump in. I was originally going to be here to answer any specific questions, and Mr. Hove is going to be leading the presentation, but Dave Betts was going to introduce the topic as the chair for Partners for Parks. I do believe you went through your goals quite a bit quicker than most anticipated, so I think that's where the delay is, but I can jump in on his behalf since we're ready to go. And I'm hoping that Al has the presentation. If not, I can pull that up for him as well. So Partners for Parks is partnering with City of Lakewood on a feasibility study to really to take a look at the barn restoration project from a public-private partnership perspective. That's a lot of P's. The intent is to determine the enthusiasm, the probability, and the realism of being able to create this kind of a partnership in the city of Lakewood. We know that there's a lot of enthusiasm for this, for the barns, because I've been here 20 years and regularly we get calls and people want to use the barn and see the barn and register for the barn and have a barn dance and do all those fun things that a barn that you could do in a restored barn. Unfortunately, the barns are over 100 years old, and really they only meet occupancy, or no occupancy codes, but they do provide the opportunity to be used for storage, which they all are at this point. So the idea is to take a look at, do we have the community will, and of course it would be City Council's authority as well, since you are the keeper of the barns, to restore them and to use them as a public space. So Al is going to share the feasibility study, kind of the steps of how that will occur and how the council might be involved in that process. So Al, are you ready to take it away? You're on mute. Al, you're on mute.
Yes, Mary. Can you share the presentation slides?
I will do my best right here to share the presentation. Can you see that?
Right.
And let's go to. Can you all see that presentation slide? Thumbs up?
Yes, but go ahead and hit from beginning, Mary.
Oh, I have that. Oh, it's on this screen, so I need to switch screens there. Thank you. Let's see. I'm sorry about that. I'm usually doing this from my home computer. at beginning, and I need to switch slides. Just a moment, sorry. Working with, let's see, I'm on the wrong screen. Brianna, you want to help me here?
Mary, can you try to use the presenter mode up at the top underneath monitor? See if that helps scale it to size for us.
Yes, I am. Let's see. I don't have that on this one, do
Far right, upper band,
I? Far right.
other right.
Oh, the other right.
Now just straight down, presenter view.
Oh, golly, thank you so much. Do I hit enter or something?
And then hit from beginning off to the left underneath file.
Yes. Are you seeing it now?
We are not, but if you'd like, I can share my screen and pull it up for us.
That'd be
Right,
great.
just try double clicking. Okay.
I apologize. Do you have that, Brianna?
Does that give you the full view?
Yes, it does, Brianna. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna. Thank you, Mary. My colleague, Emily Happy, will be joining us. You guys are so fast and efficient. We were anticipating something closer to 7 o'clock. So on behalf of my team, I'm just really delighted to be here. This is exciting. Partners for Parks for selecting us to be part of this feasibility study, for their enthusiasm and tangible support for this project, and of course the city of Lakewood for your due diligence. You've done so many studies. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the studies you've done over the past 20 years and the feasibility study that's before you today. But I thank you for your vision for this project, for the vision that you have for Fort Steilacoom Park, and the recognition that historic preservation can be a driving force for economic development. So I just got a note from Emily. She'll be joining us shortly. But if you could take us to the next slide, Mary, that would be great. So as you can see, there's a number of objectives that relate to this study. But as I mentioned, this one is different than the studies that have been done in the past. So Mr. Mayor and members of the council, this is an essential part of the feasibility study process. Before seeking a major gift or support in the community, whether it is public or private, it's designed to seek the advice and counsel of those whose time and energy and money will be needed for this project to be successful. So what you have before you are some study objectives. These are the things that we are seeking to realize as we go through this. And it begins with an assessment and a development of the internal campaign readiness. The feasibility study started in April, so we have been in the planning phase for April and May, and we just concluded that and began our interview process last week. So what the objectives of the study will be is to create and test a compelling case for support. I trust that members of the council have received a brochure that talks about the H Barn project. We call it the preliminary case for support. And it is to inform those whose advice that we are seeking, their opinions about the vision for the project, the plans for the project. It's to gauge kind of the external goodwill and enthusiasm for this project, and to evaluate the appeal that it would have in the community. We test goals and timelines. We develop and prioritize a list of prospective donors whom we begin to approach, and develop and prioritize a list of campaign leaders. These are all parts of the outcome that we're to receive from this study, and it will help to create an overall plan with recommended strategies for moving forward. Mary, if you could go to the next slide. I'm not sure if our colleague has come here and joined us yet, but I'm happy to continue that process, looking at kind of the process, the timelines, and key benchmarks. As I mentioned last week, we started. My first interview was with the city manager. That was a great place to start. And then we also interviewed with Mary and Dave Betts, who is our task force chair, as well as Sally Saunders, who's the president of the board for Partners for Parks. As we look at the next slide, this shows the 5 phases that we're going through. And as I mentioned, in April and May, we did an internal assessment of the landscape. There was a lot of work that went into looking at where things stand right now, the competition, the demographics, the planning, all of the studies that have been to date, looking at why the H-Barn was selected, and learned a lot about Partners for Parks itself to develop that preliminary case. As I mentioned, I think everyone has, and to go through a process of selecting the interviewees. So what we were looking to do there is identify people whose advice would be so important in looking at the feasibility of creating a public-private initiative that could raise, we're tested $7 million to actually accomplish the objectives, which would be preserving and protecting the barns, renovating them into a multi-use facility. We then moved into, during the time of June and July, we'll be interviewing people one-on-one. It's taking place at City Hall. These interviews are about 45 minutes to an hour. And we'll also administer an online survey. We probably will interview close to 65 individuals one-on-one, but we'll also be talking with a number of other folks pursuant to an online survey. And then come August, we'll take this data, we'll analyze it, we'll prepare and present findings, and develop a plan forward. As we look at what will happen during the analysis phase, which takes place in August, after we've had an opportunity to glean from public and private officials, citizens, leaders in our community, business owners, foundation representatives, a great many different representatives. What we'll learn is what prospective leaders and contributors think and feel about this particular project to be funded and the case for support that was presented. We call it a preliminary case because the final case, and if that's a term of art that may be unfamiliar with some, this is your written tool of persuasion. So this would hold within it all of the emotional reasons why this project is exciting. The history of Fort Steilacoom Park, the love for the barns, the impact that the identity for the barns and the work of renovating it into a multi-use facility would have in terms of regional economic development. These sorts of things would be tested as we went forward and got people's opinions about that. It would help to shape the campaign plan. We would test this goal of $7 million. Is that an achievable goal? We look at the timeline, which is estimated to be around 2.5 to 3 years from the private sector point of view. That allows pledge payments so people can maximize the support that they would want to give to a project like this. Who are the prospective leaders? How to enlist them? So for instance, as a city manager could attest, one of the questions that we have is, when you go into a campaign like this, who would be a natural honorary chair? That is, who has that kind of credibility that would bring that level of credibility to a project like this? Who would be a general campaign chair? Some of those names of people who are the roll up your sleeves kind of people who could help to manage a campaign such as this. You begin to look at, the leaders and the roles that are part of a campaign structure. We look at a $7 million campaign. I've done dozens of campaigns, in my life. Probably 8 or 10 of them were done during the Great Recession. All have been successful. We've raised over $100 million, in those particular efforts. One of the things that happens during the study is we look at what it takes to raise, for instance, $7 million. And so you begin to identify persons who have that capacity, who have the belief, and who have the connections to a project such as this. It's an engaging conversation that takes place. It's all confidential. We only use representative comments, but people will share on their hearts what they think about this project. And ultimately, that's important if we're to engage them in the future success of an event like this. And as I mentioned, a well-informed table of investments. This is that gift table that looks at a project such as this. When you think about the private sector, about 90% of your funds will come from about 10% of the people. That doesn't make that 10% of the folks more important, but if you don't do a good job of identifying those individuals and engaging them in the process, you can have hundreds of other folks that will be involved, as a project like this would easily attract. But that group, that public phase campaign, might enlist perhaps as much as $100,000 of the $7 million that we're testing in this project. And the last slide, this is kind of a bridge slide, or one right before that, Mary. This is kind of a bridge slide. So it begins to look at, with the study, what does that information give by way of foundation to create what would be a successful campaign structure? And so as you can see at the things that have been identified there, is it an appealing project that meets a vital community need? And as Mary and as others have shared with us already, it's one of the first questions that comes up. Can we have a picnic in there? Can we do a dance? Can we utilize the barns? And of course, at this point in time, we can't. But what is the appeal of that particular project, and does it meet a vital need? Because of the nature of the questions, we begin to get a sense of the confidence people have both in the city, that they would have in Partners for Parks, in the collaborations, the leadership, so that when one would move into a campaign structure, that kind of information would already be there. Is there a compelling case for support? Is there the emotional tie for people to want to be involved? And then rational reasons to justify why they might make the most significant gift they've ever made in their life in support of a project like this. We mentioned the campaign table of investments. And so this really addresses this next question. Are there sufficient prospects at the requisite giving levels? So as an example, for a campaign that we're testing $7 million, you probably would have to have one, perhaps two gifts in the range of $1 million. That would mean there would need to be probably 6 entities or organizations or funding sources that would have the ability to do that. Of that 6, probably 3 that then would be your qualified prospect, because they would have not only the ability, but a belief and connection to the project. But ultimately, my point is that you would need to have that one. At $1 million, another at $750,000, several at $500,000, you can begin to see that how that formula would work out, in the sense that there will be a small number of folks that will be representing the lion's share of the funding for a project like this. Nonetheless, this project will attract many hundreds of individuals. And so the compelling case for support is sufficient prospects at the requisite giving levels begins to address those kind of questions. Is there influential, enthusiastic leadership? When you look at a campaign structure, my experience has been that probably the most important criteria, in addition to the ones that have been discussed so far, but probably the most important one is leadership. So are there influential, enthusiastic leaders in the community who feel like this is a project that they want to see come into fruition? Well, we know someone like Dave Betts, right? You've all met Dave. Dave is one of those individuals who he holds it deeply in his heart. You know, he loves that park, and he's going to do whatever he can to try to make this come to fruition, as are all members of the board. Is it a favorable environment? You know, had the study been done last year, which was the intent, you know, that study may not have been as effective, given what we've just experienced with COVID. Things have shifted a lot. There's probably a great desire to come together again in utilization of a structure such as this. So anyway, we are testing then, is it a favorable environment, and is the timing right to implement a structure such as, or a campaign such as this? And is it a well-planned and resourced campaign effort? If indeed it is a public-private initiative, you know, how does that work? And how does it support one another from the private sector level, as well as from the public support as well? So I hope that that gives the council kind of an overview of the feasibility study itself. I'd be more than happy to address any questions, and I welcome your comments.
Questions for Mr. Hove? Mr. Brockie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hove. Is it Hove?
Yes, it is Hove. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So in your, I think you must have mentioned it. So, but just in case it got by me, typically for this amount of money, how long would you expect the capital campaign to be?
So Councilman, traditionally a capital campaign of this magnitude would last about 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay.
Traditionally, those who would be making commitments from the private sector would normally have 3 to 5 years in which to make those payments.
Okay, so 2.5 to 3 years for the campaign, 3 to 5 years to make the payments. So they could make multiple payments over time.
Correct. And what our experience has been is that people are able to maximize their level of participation. So for instance, if you have a major donor who has the ability to make a gift of, say, $20,000, really loves this project, really wants to be engaged, but if they had the opportunity to spread those payments out, they might be able to make a commitment of $100,000. And then you can look at also naming opportunities, those things. But it gives out every individual or every entity that would be involved in this an opportunity to maximize their contribution.
So I would assume, you know, when you talk about parks, there would be different. I mean, there's certain groups that we find are really interested in trails, for instance, and really get involved in maybe not giving money, and in some cases they do, but certainly their time and talents. In this case, this is in a park, and it's part of our park, and it's an important part of our park, but it's really kind of an amenity to that park that maybe people who are interested in open space aren't going to be interested in. So what kind of groups do you think will be interested in this type of project?
No, it's a great question. The appeal of this project appears to be very broad-based. So you're going to attract a number of people who love the trails, others who love the current functionality, the lake, the walking, the dog park, those sorts of things. There are others who love the tradition. You know, Fort Steilacoom Park has a genesis that goes back well over 10,000 years, beginning with the Steilacoom tribe. And then coming into the 1800s with the Hudson Bay Company and Western State Hospital, you know, subsequent to that. And so you're going to have people who care greatly about the history. And there's going to be another group of folks that are going to care greatly about, and they're not mutually exclusive, are going to care a lot about they're going to care about preservation, the protection and preservation of these barns. This is part of the due diligence that has taken place already. And I applaud the city council and the vision of the city for having done these different studies where you have looked at those 100-year-old barns, you selected the H barn complex as the one most suitable for renovation. But there'll be those folks who care about that level of preservation. The city probably will also be interested in another study that you had conducted. I believe that was in 2010, 2011. And it spoke to if the identity for the park is closely aligned with preservation of these barns, that preservation of a barn such as the H barn complex could also be an economic engine for regional economic development. Already there's 1 million+ people, you know, who are visiting the parks. They get really excited. I married the farmer's daughter. I came from Iowa, came out here in the late 70s to go to law school. I saw that park and I saw those silos. I put my hands on them and I just got excited. I've been in lots of those parks. So you're going to have, there's this very strong regional economic development benefit that will come as a consequence as well. So what the thing is with major gifts is normally the work is to find out what is that appeal, what's of interest to that particular foundation or individual. And then you try to match the appeal or the interest that they have with the priority that the city has and what Partners for Parks, you know, as the entity that's partnering with the city on a project such as this. And then you come to an agreement as to how one might participate.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm all done.
You know, I'm old enough now that I've found myself in the vortex of a couple of building campaigns, and both of which had to start much like this is ground zero, where there wasn't a history of nonprofit fundraising or donors to feed off of. And in both instances, we were successful, but there was a relatively long lead time where we built concentric circles of support of the type of people you're talking about to find those one or two $500,000, $1 million lead gifts in the middle, fundraising after fundraising. What do you see as a timeline for that?
Mr. Mayor, that's a great question, and the feasibility study really helps to bring that forward. What my experience has been is long before you go into a public campaign, you have accomplished your fundraising goal. And the reason is because you're talking to people on the front side. So I've been involved with projects, for instance, that can move forward because they have the cash flow, because of the entities that are involved. And maybe during that process, when the building is being built, for instance, those major donors, those significant donors might be part of a hard hat tour, or they may be seeing some preliminary architectural plans and drawings. Significant donors, large gifts are normally attracted to big plans, big visions. And so those are the ones that we work with on the front side, not because they're more important. I mean, obviously they're critical. Normally there's about 12 donors that are going to represent half of whatever a goal is. It doesn't matter if it's $1 million or $100 million. So you plan your campaign, you know, with those larger significant donors on the front side. And we ask, Mr. Mayor, for their advice and counsel on the front side. What we know is if we're asking someone for money, we're going to get their advice anyway. So better to ask for their opinion first, and they feel very much part of it. And then we also are able to fashion the case for support and the approach accordingly based upon that. I see my colleague Emily Happy is here, and so maybe Emily, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with regards to that?
I concur, and I'd also like to share that it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I've been here the whole time, but as a guest, not as a presenter, so I was invisible, but I've been partaking in the conversation. It's a pleasure to be here, and as someone who is Lakewood born and raised, and my family worked towards cityhood, and my grandmother bought her house on the lake. In the late teens, early 1920s. So this project is very near and dear to my heart, even just this feasibility study portion of it. And so I agree. I think there's such wide appeal. And I thank you, Al, for doing a fabulous job in my absence.
Okay, but going back to the trial attorney I used to be, the answer to the question, I don't quibble with the process. What do you think the lead time should be on that process before the city would be in a position to nail down the lead donors and commit with some relative certainty that we could fund the project?
So, Mr. Mayor, the feasibility study's intention is to identify folks who have that capacity and to have conversation with them. So I would hope that depending upon the results of those interviews, that when we analyze those results in August and then make a subsequent report to Partners for Parks as well as to the city in August and/or September, that we're going to have identified a number of those folks at this different level. When you move into a campaign, assuming that was the case, the way that a campaign normally looks is that first 9 months is that part of that preparatory time where I think that you're driving to, Mr. Mayor. And so that's what takes place in the first 9 months. That's also a preparatory planning phase where you're working with those prospective leaders. You're putting together your campaign council. You're building and standing up your task force. You've identified your campaign general chair. You've identified your honorary chair. You're honing your case for support. And the campaign, the fundraising piece where you're asking for the dollars, then takes about another minimum of a year to 18 months. So I think it's in that period of time after the feasibility study is concluded, and probably within that first 9 months of a campaign that's being firmed up. But a person should know a lot by the conclusion of this feasibility study, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I look forward to seeing this move forward. Thank you for coming tonight and bringing us up to speed. It's an exciting process. I personally enjoy the history of the Fort Steilacoom Park area immensely, and it's a matter of allocating scarce resources. So I just, on a personal note, I next time you see him, say hello to your missing link and chastise him for not being here tonight. I practiced law with Jim Hueshagen for over 30 years. So
He would have loved to have been here. He was celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary. That's his only excuse.
And you know how he arrived for his wedding? There's a canoe at Fort Steilacoom Park and took off in a Volkswagen van for a honeymoon touring around the country. He's truly a child of the 60s and early 70s.
That I did not know that.
If you see, I wouldn't have said that if he'd come. But anyway, thanks again for being here tonight.
Thank you all.
We will now move to our next item of business, which is the first quarter financial report with Ms. Krause.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is the first quarter financial report, and I have the report up. I wasn't going to share my screen just yet. I wanted to just go over some highlights, the key highlights for the general and street fund, as well as the real estate excise tax and the transportation benefit district. So just starting off, the key points for the first quarter 2021 report is you'll see that I removed the COVID-19 action strategies and replaced it with the American Rescue Plan Act. The general and street fund ending fund balance is very healthy at $15.7 million at the end of the first quarter. This is the highest compared to the annual ending fund balance in previous years. And the ending fund balance will be addressed as part of the mid-biennium adjustment with capital projects taken into consideration. The general and street fund, and I'm going to share my screen so you can actually see it. Okay. Let's see. Can you see a chart here?
No.
No. Okay. Let's see. Can you see a report?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I did have a chart. I just can't get to it right this moment. Okay, so I had another chart that showed the ending fund balance, and here you can just see this is only going back to 2016. And you can see at the end of March, we have 15.6 million, and the cash balance is 8.9 million. The revenues that are up for the general and street fund compared to 2020 is property tax is up by 660,000, sales tax is up by 916,000, criminal justice sales tax and park sales tax follow the same. And so criminal justice is up by 76,000, parks is up by 26,000. We're seeing increases in gambling tax of 226,000. State shared revenues is up by $110,000, and that's primarily in the high crime and liquor. Development service fees and permits is up by 40,000. The admissions tax, so the areas that are down is admissions tax is down by 57,000, utility tax by 68,000, franchise fees by 21,000, intergovernmental by 104,000, fines and forfeitures for court down by 94,000, and the cameras by 161,000. So those are the key ones. So compared to budget as well as compared to the prior years, year to date, it's about $1.4 million that we're up by. On the expenditure side, for comparison with 2020, we're down by $330,000. And compared to the year to date budget, it's down by $750,000. And some of the key highlights for the expenditures, all departments are seeing expenditure savings on a year-to-date budget, and compared to year-to-date 2020, depending on the department, we're seeing some increases just for the general increase in cost, as well as we do have one department, I'll just call out my own department, administrative services. Compared to the year-to-date budget, we're up by $6,800, and I've assured the city manager that we will be within target by the end of the year. From a cost recovery perspective, development services, the target policy is 85%. On a year-to-date, it is 80% cost recovery, and the average between 2016 and 2020 is 88% cost recovery. The parks policy target is 45% on a year-to-date basis. They've reached 44%, and on a average between 2016 and 2020, it's a 45% recovery. The real estate excise tax is doing very well. And compared to the first quarter, compared to last year, we're up by 103,000. And compared to the year-to-date budget, it is up by 305,000. Transportation Benefit District is also coming in strong, 3,000 above 2020 levels and 18,000 compared to the year-to-date budget. So that's my very high-level overview of first quarter's financial report, and that concludes my presentation.
Questions for Ms. Kraus? We can't see everybody yet, so.
And Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Bulkey.
yeah, I'll just ask Ta or Ms. Kraus. So kind of give us an outlook on the gambling admissions, those ones that were so badly hurt by closures. Clearly, gambling has opened up again. Do we know when and if? It looked like one of the theaters had a little bit of revenue, but the other one had none. What do we know about their openings, and are they still restricted as to capacity?
You know, and I meant to look that up. There was one theater that was supposed to be opening up in mid-May, and I forgot to look it up before this meeting. Compared to the $13,000 that we received for the first quarter, we did reduce it down by quite a bit on the budget side, but I think we just have to wait and see what they're going to be doing. I'm not sure if both of the theaters are going to remain open. I read something where one of them, it was iffy. On the gambling tax, you know, now that they're open, I do think that we'll see some increases, and we'll end up the year with increases on the gambling tax side. It seems like with the recession, you know, you would expect that people wouldn't be gambling, but sometimes that's the pick-me-up, and that didn't seem to be so impacted. The franchise fees were a little bit high compared to where we were. Intergovernmental, you'll see the $104,000 decrease, but that's also because of the court cost true-up is affecting that. And camera enforcement, we didn't have the revenues for the first quarter like we did for the first quarter of 2020, or a great portion of it. I'm expecting that to increase some because, you know, with the schools reopening, and I think some people sometimes forget where the locations are or forget to be mindful. The court fines and forfeitures, you know, consistent with the statewide trend that we had been seeing. I haven't pulled it up for the last year, but we're just seeing decreases in that area.
Hey, Ta.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that covers the subjects that I need. I appreciate that. I do want to ask about the property tax. I mean, to see a 24.7% increase. So,
So remember
is that a timing issue that we expect more money to be coming in, or more money came in last year or in April? And
so compared to where we were last year, I can't remember the exact period where there was the property tax deferral. I'm not seeing the property tax deferral this year, but at the end of the day, we're going to get what we're authorized to levy, and we might get some delinquent taxes.
Okay. I forgot about the deferral. That's right. Okay, good. And the sales tax, do you want to talk about that? I mean, the sales tax everywhere has just gone wild. I mean, we're seeing huge numbers at the county. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling.
I can't remember who I was having a conversation with last week. It was an external party outside of the city, and I cannot even remember why we even talked about sales tax. But overall, what you're saying, Councilmember Boki, is what's happening across the state. So we're not exactly sure. I mean, there's a limit to how much stimulus money. I am guessing that people have changed their minds on, say, for retirement. There was a time period where people could take out money from their retirement. It was like up to $100,000 in certain retirements without any of the penalties. And so I'm pretty sure some people use that. I also think that there was a mind shift in what's really important to life, and maybe saving wasn't everything during the pandemic. I know people who decided to retire early just because of what they had seen with their loved ones and just a reevaluation of life in general. So I'm guessing that some of those sales tax increases are the result of that.
So when I look on page 57 of the packet where you break it down by business district, it really does look like it was strong everywhere, right? There just doesn't seem to be, except Springbrook, I guess, but that's a very small number. Steilacoom West, which is out here at this end of town. But in all the major areas of town, it looks like in construction, food services, all other categories, and then the various areas, it just went gangbusters.
It's just an overall increase everywhere.
I mean, International District up 62%.
And you know,
that's incredible.
I went to grab something to eat prior to this meeting and I came back with nothing because the lines were full everywhere. The parking lot was full, and even Mod Pizza that says they're super quick. I don't think I could have came back in time with like 12 people in line. And to be quite honest, I don't even think that people are abiding by the 6 feet distance. I think people have just kind of sort of gotten tired and are ready to be out and about. And so I came back with nothing.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. You know, the rest of the, although the first month or two, so I don't know, it just kind of keeps rolling on right now in this double digit. But I'm glad to see we're in the game on this, on the large increases. That's all from me. Thank you.
I have a couple of things with, well, others of you who don't have your hands up for pondering. On that note, as far as the spending, I'll note I have some good information that when Congress was considering the stimulus payments to individuals, that the income caps on those payments were based on, in large part, on a logic that if people had money at that level, above the cap, that they would save it. And if they gave it to people who had less money, they would spend it. It wasn't so much for security for those people as it was for an economic stimulus, because by all indications, that money has been spent. Looking at back, I think it's 55 of our package where you have the pie chart of sales tax by area. You say, you know, all others, is it correct that the internet sales are in all others?
Yes, it is in all others.
And what portion of that is internet sales, and how has that changed year to year? I guess the question is, we know there's a shift. We know there's an acceleration of the trend to go away from brick and mortar to internet sales. Some of that may not be sustained now that people can go back out, but you don't expect it to go back to the old normal. And I guess built into that, my real question is, how's that impact Lakewood? Anecdotally, it seems that we have a chance of gaining by increased internet sales that are the situs of which, or nexus of which, is Lakewood.
So I don't know, can you still see my screen? I'm on the screen that has the Marketplace Fairness Act quarterly distributions. And in 2021, you'll see that we have 79,000 for Q1. And in 2020, it was 44,000. So we've increased by 35,000.
Okay. So that's up rather substantially.
Yes.
And could you go back and refresh my rapidly fading memory as to the overall numbers that you gave us to start with? What are we up, total up in taxes over budget and down in expenses under budget? Just the two gross.
Okay, so overall, just revenues in general is up by $1,455,000. and that's 13% compared to the same period as last year. The budget side is going to be very similar. It's up by $1,425,000 or 13%. On the expenditure side, we have savings currently of $330,000 compared to the same period of 2020. And compared to the year-to-date budget, which is based on some trends, we're down by $750,000. So we had anticipated as part of the 2021 budget that the beginning balance would be 5.77 million. We actually came in beginning balance of $13.6 million. So remember that the budget was prepared during very uncertain pandemic times. And we actually did not have the 2020 closing numbers. We do have that now. And in the previous quarter's report, the Q4 report, we saw things come out much better than we had anticipated on both the revenue side as well as the expenditure savings. So right now, we have a beginning balance of $13.6 million, ending fund balance on a year-to-date basis of $15.68 million.
So we're in round numbers, $2 million ahead of budget year to date.
For the operating side, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Ranstetter.
Yes, Ms. Kraus, and I know that your report is looking back a year, but in the ARPA guidelines about how the money we're receiving can be used to replace lost city revenues, they used a base year, we're supposed to use a base year of 2019. So although we're looking much better with respect to 2021 versus 2020, how rosy is the picture compared to 2019?
I don't actually have the number right off the top of my head, but basically in general, the way that we compare the revenue loss or calculate the revenue loss, initially I thought it was just for the general fund, the main operating fund. But as we learned more and got more guidance from various agencies, there's more to the calculation. So basically they have about 4 different items that you cannot include as part of your calculation, with 2019 being our full year of revenues. So we take our 2019, compare it to 2020 to get what our revenue loss is. But they also said that we could take a look and add our enterprise funds as well. So basically the calculation and the numbers that I originally provided to the city manager should be much better. And along with that, there are ways that you can, even though you do the calculation, there are ways that we can use the monies. So for example, city manager had put in there that, there's a couple areas that we could restore. Those are very viable ways to restore our expenditures based on the revenue loss. It's just different mechanisms for how to do it. But the bottom line is I will need to redo that calculation and come up with a more, a better number that is consistent with the additional guidelines that we received, using 2019 as a base year.
Okay, just so I can get my head around, you said you think the numbers will look better. And by better, do you mean we had more revenue loss so that we can use ARPA money to replace more money, or better meaning we had less revenue loss?
I guess, your question is very valid. I'm looking at the opportunity to use ARPA funds with more flexibility, and that being the better picture.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Whalen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm here. Barely. Can you hear me?
Your hand's up.
I don't know why. My hands are on the steering wheel.
Okay. Okay.
So if I may, since I can't share two screens at one time, but I just quickly put this together prior to the meeting just to give a sense of our ending fund balance, because it's something that the City Council should be very proud of, based on your financial policies and the direction that you provided in the budget and such. So in 2007 was the year that I started looking at, well, that's about the year that I looked at beginning when I came here to prepare the financial forecast. In 2007, you'll see that we had $9.5 million in ending fund balance. It grew in 2008 to 10.10 million, just over 10 million. In 2009, now keep in mind that, you know, the recession, by the time that we knew about it, was about 2007, 2008 timeframe. And you can see here that our ending fund balance dips down to about 1.7 million in 2011. And it slowly starts to grow a little bit, but then goes back down. In 2014 is when city manager came on board in 2013, but that was in late September, and we're still trying to figure things out. Some decisions were made in 2014 and 2015 in terms of, basically catching up on what we didn't do back in 2007-8, and then also implementing the financial policies, which helped grow our ending fund balance in the general fund, the city's main operating fund, to 5.85 million, and you can see it growing over the years, a slight dip in 2018 and 19, but we continue to see increases. So I thought that's kind of a cool view of it, I guess. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Kraus? Thank you much.
Thank you.
Nice to see a favorable financial report. So we'll now move to item number 4, the downtown town center sub-area plan update. Mr. Buer.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see my screen, everyone?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. The first slide is just basically an introductory slide. It's talking about the update to the downtown town center sub-area plan. And specifically, the discussion this evening is talking about a placement or beginning the process of installing a new central park in the downtown. This report basically has 5 elements. It reviews the policy and strategy excerpts from the current downtown plan. It also reviews 2 proposed downtown park designs. It goes through an internal exercise with staff to look at the Burke's Parks concepts and did they work or not, and I have some more information on that as we go through this presentation. It follows by a policy discussion on the downtown park itself and where the council wants to head next. And then for history buffs, I found this old design of a park in the town center from the Tacoma City paper back in 1997. The design was actually done by local architect James Guerrero, and the full article, the photographs were done by John Simpson. So kind of interesting how some of this stuff comes back. The downtown Lakewood Park concept is having a series of green streets that connect the south end and the north end. with one park at the QFC site in that general location, and then also a central park down by City Hall. You see that great big green rectangle towards the bottom of the middle picture. And then on the other two sides of this map, I did show a photograph of the downtown Burien Park, which is 1 acre in size, and then the Puyallup Park, which is 2 acres in size. Very briefly, there are 5 basic policies dealing with the downtown park itself, creating a public space, acquiring lands to construct a community gathering destination, investment into a park and recreation system, encouraging the development of open space and recreation amenities in business parks or other commercial areas, and basically emphasizing convenient access for pedestrians and bicycle riders. I also came across this little 5-point aspect to what makes a city park work. It should be nearby for everyone. It should look and feel truly public. It should be simple and not over-designed. Take advantage of the natural contours of the land, and you should be able to both see and walk through it. This is Burke and Associates, what I call Park One option, and this was what was introduced and made a part of the downtown plan. And basically you see City Hall as the orange building at the very bottom, and you see the green space a little bit to the northeast of it. The corner of Main Street and 59th, you see hop jacks. And you see something of a redesign of parts of the town center so it matches with the proposed park. And off to the lower right, you see more or new multifamily development and some additional office uses adjacent to 59th. They did prepare a concept drawing of what this would look like. Again, City Hall is in the lower central section of the figure. Hop jacks is across the street. And then you see basically a mixed use multi-story building with an avenue adjacent to the park. And up in the corner, the upper right-hand corner, you'd see the theaters and the bookstore. Oops, went the wrong way. This is Park 2 concept, which is expanding it and putting it immediately across the street from City Hall. This would be a much larger park. It would also result in the realignment of 59th Street. Parts of 59th would go away. It would also result in major redevelopment of the surrounding buildings so that the buildings themselves are fronting the park. Whereas currently with some of the existing buildings that we have in the town center, it's the back of the buildings that you would look at with the park. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. Again, this is another concept of what this would look like. You basically, again, see a very large 3 to 4 acre park across from City Hall. Then we did some alternative park locations, and really the exercise that was given to us by the city manager was think big. Don't worry about money. Cost is not an object. Don't worry about infrastructure and utilities. And imagine if there was nothing there, how would this park look? And so on that basis of thinking big, I chose not to mess around with 2 and 3 acre parks or 1 acre parks, but instead going with 3 and 4. So you see a whole bunch of different alternative designs in the report. And I did place a note in the upper right-hand corner. Spatial relationships of park space and existing or future buildings needs to be addressed. If you build a park and the park fronts the back sides of buildings, it's not going to be very successful. And so the park needs to be built in such a way that it correlates with any type of redevelopment that should take place on the RPAI properties, which are the predominant ownership arrangement in this part of the city. if you go through the report also shows the pros and cons of, I think, about 10 different options, focusing on the 3 and 4 acre proposal, both in the form of a basic block of a square or a rectangle. I won't go through all of them this evening for time purposes, but you get an idea of the fact that we did go through this process to see what it would look like. The next piece, I just like to mention to the City Council that RPAI does have mixed use development with park sites in other cities. The two that I could find are both found in the Northeast. One is in Virginia and the other one is in the Washington, DC area in a place called Largo. But they have halted some vertical construction as of March 2020 as a result of the pandemic. There's an ongoing discussion when you talk about mixed use. What is the appropriate optimal mix of mixed use? And it can vary greatly depending upon the market in which it is located. In the Northeast, it's roughly 60-40. In other parts of in that area, it's 50-50. But out in the West, in the Los Angeles area, it's 100% multifamily. So this situation of what is optimal mix will have bearing on any type of RPAI's redevelopment plans. The other issues are, of course, retail disruption caused by online purchasing, community income, and the size of the surrounding population. When this information is applied for all of the RPAI properties nationwide, there's about 103, Lakewood is not as well positioned as other properties. And this, in my mind, explains why RPAI seems to have a current lack of interest in pursuing the downtown plan in Lakewood. So what's next? The first is to contact RPAI and find out if they have plans for major redevelopment of the town center. Now, we are aware of some things. For example, there is the new trampoline facility that will go into the old Joe's building across the street from City Hall. But that has been deferred in part because of the pandemic. I'm anticipating that that will pick up sometime this year. But if there are other things that they're not proposing to do, or not at this time, determine if there is a possibility of some sort of a partnership so as to provide an incentive to RPAI. If RPAI again says no to working with the city on redeveloping the town center, Lakewood City has 3 basic choices. First, do nothing and place the downtown plan to the side while we wait on RPAI. 2, and then this is kind of an intriguing idea that needs more work, but amend the downtown plan and establish an amortization plan for the removal or demolition of non-conforming uses and structures. Amortization refers to the process by which non-conforming uses and structures must be eliminated or made to conform to requirements of the sub-area plan at the end of a certain period of time. This is called amortization and allows the property owner a return on their investment on the property. Now, you most regularly see amortization towards signs. In conversations with others, it's an intriguing concept if the city were to move forward and we're not ready to yet fund a park. But again, I would caution the council, beware of unintended consequences with this one. It could have impacts on leases, the ability of RPAI to sell their property. It could impact some aspects of property rights issues. So we're not suggesting that we do this right now, but it is an option that needs to be explored. The third option, of course, is to use the city's power of eminent domain and acquire a park site. So the recommendations this evening, 1, contact RPAI and find out where they are with Lakewood. 2, request financial resources to initiate park design, acquisition, and look for financing options for a future downtown park. Speaking with the city manager, this would be something that would be proposed in the mid-biennium budget. And 3, additional legal review is needed on the use of amortization. And the last slide is more for grins and giggles. but this is James Guerrero's view of Lakewood Center 2020. And you basically see the mall as it was in 1997, with the parking removed and replaced by large expanses of open space. The creeks have been opened up on the south side. There's now a Lake Russell. And then there's a trolley that runs around the building or around the perimeter of the property. And off to the left, you see this great big dark brown rectangle. If you look closely, it says City Hall. And Mr. Guerrero decided to place the City Hall over Gravity Lake Drive and have there be a tunnel underneath the street. Of course, this did not happen, but it certainly shows that there was much interest back in cityhood about pursuing some sort of a park at that time. So that's where we are today, Mr. Mayor and Council, and I'll return it back to you for any comments or direction.
Questions for Mr. Buer?
Yes,
Is that Mr.
I have
Bulkey?
questions there, Mayor. No, Mr. Whalen.
Oh, Mr. Whalen.
So one thing I wanted to raise, not just as a question, but a comment. I talked to Mr. Buer briefly this morning. I think one of the options, in addition to options 1 and 2 in the packet, we need to have an option 3. And that is the existing Gottschalk pad, because it does exist in a configuration that's not currently in use. It would be a scaled down version of what would work for Central Park based on other locations like Puyallup, Bothell, and certainly Point Ruston. It would be a much less expensive endeavor and possibly a much easier sell to RPAI to utilize existing space that's underutilized, and might be a win-win where the city could do the improvements and RPAI might give us a break. We don't know. But I think going in with the larger options that we just saw tonight are options that really, while would be wonderful in our wildest imagination, would be for a budget cost that would exceed what we could possibly ever get without possibly bonding a project that might require a vote of the residents, which may be fine. But I think we should include as an option 3, utilizing the Gottschalk's pad, if you will, because I've walked it several times this weekend. It's huge, and it still would provide for opportunities for restaurant pads, similar to what you see maybe in a Kent Station locale. So I would encourage us to talk about that and then give direction to staff that that is an option that should be considered before we commence our discussions or as part of our discussions with RPAI. So I don't know, Mr. Buer, if you have any thoughts on that based on your longstanding work. And we've been looking at this thing for ever since I've been on the council, 12 years now, in that location over there. And if we put too much, pie in the sky, 3 and 4 acre park processes in place, it'll be another 20 years before anything happens. It's my humble opinion.
Well, Mr. Whalen, this was something of an exercise to review with the council what has been approved so far and testing whether or not it would still work. It is certainly doable to approach the RPI on just the Gottschalk site only. I believe it's more than 1 acre in size, but if that is something the council wishes to pursue, we need to have a very deliberate discussion with RPAI about what it is that you're going to do if this park is built at this location, so that we have retail and or multifamily facing buildings facing the park, and making sure that all these other amenities work well and that it's all developed at the same time. Or if it's not, it's not going to be a very successful park.
Well, I think it's one of the options, not the option, but I think it's their property after all. And we need to figure out how we can make a win-win out of it.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Buer, a question about the size. You had some that were in there as 4 acres. Others, I think, that were in there as 2 acres. You showed the Puyallup one, and I don't have it pulled up, and that's a sizable park. And did you find in your studies kind of what a minimum size would be that would work? I mean, you could have a pocket park, but then it's not useful, is what I'm saying, right? So if it's an acre or a half acre, nobody's we're hardly going to do anything with it. What works, but without like tearing down 2 or 3 buildings? What would be a size that we could use?
If you're going to build a park that's going to be effective, it needs to be of a sufficient size so that you can do programming on it and have special events, things of that nature, where people can congregate and do things, and also having the right level of park furniture there that can be used. But those are things that are to be considered. Again, the way I approached this was think big, think large, and look at it from all kinds of possibilities.
Okay.
I'm hearing from the council that you're more sensitive about the size, and that perhaps the 3 and 4 acre park proposal was too large. And that may be true. But part of this is to have this discussion just to see if we can formulate where it is that you want to go. A 1 acre park would work very well. I know that the one in up north, I forgot the name of the city, has been extremely successful. So you can have a well-functioning park of 1 acre, or even potentially less, 3/4 of an acre, and be very successful with it. But it also goes back to how well you program the activity on the park, and making sure that people are there and are active and actively engaged in a variety of activities. And that's something you'd want to work out with RPAI as well, and the Parks Department and the general public.
So we're almost working it from a programming standpoint, moving back. Like, what if it was active use? It would be one size. If it's things like programming, like concerts or those kind of things, it's a different size because it's going to look different. It's going to feel different.
Yeah,
is that what you're?
That's what I'm trying to say. You said it better than I did.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have a few questions. I don't know of any in the state of Washington, but there are some parks that are public-private cooperative endeavors. And I know one in New York City, I believe, where it's a public park, but the owner of the land has the ability to close it for certain events on certain conditions. Has anything like that been discussed with our RPAI?
I've had some preliminary discussions with Mr. Caulfield and the city attorney on ownership of the park, and having RPAI continue ownership, and that the city of Lakewood operates and maintains the park. But real property, again, belongs to RPAI. That's something that we would want to explore with them in our conversations.
And then a couple other things, separate perhaps from this. I just ditto what Mr. Whalen indicated. I'm more focused on a smaller vision that is likely attainable. But the active park almost backs what we have considered property for a loop lineal park around the town center. And I would like to see some consideration of a design or discussion with RPAI regarding along the lines of what if we acquired 1 to 3 residences that back the town center, which would, that and a street vacation would open up the town center to active park. And I'm obviously not an outdoor space designer, but I'd like to see if there are any possibilities for that, because it would create a larger access for folks, draw that neighborhood into the town center without going out and around, allow people to walk a greater distance. So just a thought. And lastly, I would hope from a personal standpoint that not too much time and effort is spent on exploring amortization. I'm philosophically opposed to the concept. I think it inhibits the sale of property. It brings up questions of inverse condemnation and taking of property, and it incentivizes people to allow their property to deteriorate as they run it out. So I think there are a lot of unintended consequences there that maybe deserve a passing look. But if we want somebody's property, we should buy it, even if it's through a condemnation process. But to try to get it for nothing or drive down the value without paying for it, I think maybe legally offensive, but I find it personally distasteful. So much for that. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my comment would just be that all the concepts are nice, from ranging from different sizes to do that, but that I'm really interested in something that we could accomplish within the next 6 years, the next 3 bienniums.
Agreed.
Being able to go and do that, and that would mean we need to get a plan in around 2 to 3, so that we can look to move forward and begin to do that. So in our conversations with RPI, I wouldn't want them to be too long-term or what ifs, but I'd like them to be productive in the near term, to identify some land that they would, in some fashion, work with the city to be available for use as a park in an area that can have, as Mr. Buer says, programming for the community without too long of a horizon.
All right, thank you. Ms. Farmer.
Councilmember Branstetter almost took the words right out of my mouth. I'm interested in something that will help spark the revitalization of the mall area. And I think a park, as long as it's not too small, would really help do that. So I definitely champion the idea of something we can get done in the next couple, 3, 4 years. I also wanted to ask about our Legacy Parks plan and all the surveying and the open houses that we did. Was there anything in the feedback that really identified a gap in the types of parks that we lack? For example, a spray park or open space or trails? Is there something that the residents really desire so that we could point to it and say, oh, looks like 60% of folks want a spray park because we don't have one of those? Or
I cannot give you a good answer this evening, Ms. Farmer. I'm sorry.
That's okay. The other thing I wanted to bring up, I don't want to introduce a lot of variables here, but in my last conversation with Pierce County Library System, they were interested in this idea of a downtown park and possibly co-locating with it, or at least having the conversation around, gosh, what's the city up to, and that sort of thing. And so I would love it if we could keep them in the conversation. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none. Thank you for presenting, Mr. Buer, and more to come. I think it seems to be a strong consensus that it's not a go big or go home consensus of council. It's let's pick something that's that's functional, but realistically can be accomplished within our lifetime. So we will move to the next agenda item, which is a review of the 2021 comprehensive plan amendments with Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tiffany Spear, Long Range and Strategic Planning Manager for the city. This evening, this is actually going to be a team effort, I think, with Mr. Buer and myself. And this is, I apologize in advance because this may become somewhat complicated with me having to close one document down and open up another one. We'll just see how the discussion goes. But I'll begin, and then I'll ask Mr. Buer to join in as needed. So if you'll recall, we've now had a study session and a public hearing on the 8 proposed comprehensive plan amendments for this comprehensive cycle. And last week, there was the public hearing where a number of written comments came in as well as verbal comments. And there were tables provided tonight in your packet that respond to those comments. But there were also a number of comments that really focused on only 3 of the 8 proposed amendments. First of all was the energy and climate change chapter, and many comments not only came through the public hearing process or comment process, but also from council members themselves. And then there was a lot of verbal comment in last week's public hearing related to Gary Oak tree preservation. And this stemmed from, sorry, pun, this came from the item number 2 in the amendments, which was simply to reflect the fact that last year the City Council rezoned a number of parcels within Springbrook to industrial business park. And there were those that were testifying saying that they were opposed to that rezoning because of the presence of Gary Oak trees. So it was tied somewhat to that amendment application, but it really wasn't directly related. And then the third bucket of comments were related to amendment number 04, which is talking about allowing or encouraging additional housing types within certain residential zones of the city. And in particular, the idea that 2 or 3 family dwelling development would be allowed in the R1 through R4 zone, and also that multifamily development would be allowed in the MR or mixed residential 1 and 2 zones. So within your packet, there's a couple of places where you'll see responses. There's several tables included in the memo regarding this topic. One summarizes comments from council members, which in particular refer to the proposed energy and climate change chapter. There is a table that includes comments coming from utilities, which relate to also the energy and climate change chapter. And then there are comments again from the public hearing, talking about that amendment number 2, the rezoning in Springbrook, and then the related Gary Oak tree issues that were raised. And then there was the internal discussion had by city council members regarding the new allowed uses within the residential zones as well. And that's discussed in the memo itself rather than an attachment. So with the 2021 new proposed chapter related to energy and climate change, there is discussion in your memo about the council comments that came particularly from Councilmember Brandstetter and Councilmember Farmer. There's discussion by the Puget Sound Energy representative submitted in public hearing about the various initiatives that the utility is taking on itself to help cut carbon footprint, which are not in response to what the city is proposing, but may actually help inform what sort of implementation measures the city wants to go forward with. And so for tonight, I guess there's discussion to be had amongst yourselves about whether this chapter is ready to go forward as it is, whether the council wants to go ahead with the request from the Planning Commission that it be told in the 22 comprehensive plan cycle to come back with some recommendations regarding how to implement the chapter. And then also just understanding how the council wants this handled in the 2021 comprehensive package overall, and whether this is ready to go forward with or without amendment. The second one is that rezone of Springbrook parcels. Once again, much of the public comment was actually focused on action already taken. And then there's the conversation about the Gary oak trees that was raised. Attachment E of tonight's memo explains the current tree regulation scheme that the city has in place. And so the request again tonight would be to get some direction from you to make sure that this is something you're ready to move forward with, or if there's some other related action that you would want to take separate and apart from the adoption of the comprehensive plan package that's before you now. And then the last one, the various housing types. The part of the amendment that really hasn't gotten any resistance or criticism is that section that talks about the current city's programs that preserve existing and encourage new affordable housing units. But the rest of it is this additional uses within various zones of the city. So included in your packet this evening are various graphic and photo examples of what might be able to get built or redeveloped within various zones of the city. And then there's also a discussion about residential design standards, either currently in the city of Lakewood or examples from other areas that might be picked up and used as a future regulatory effort if the council were to direct that. So if the question comes up, we do have some examples, but essentially the request tonight for you is, would you like to adopt this amendment with or without change? So do you want to go ahead and move forward with the recommended allowance of 2 and 3 family development in R1 through R4, and also multifamily within MR1 and MR2? And do you want to go forward with the Planning Commission's action to go ahead in the next comp plan cycle and bring you back some recommendations on implementation? Or do you want to continue this or change it? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because with any questions that you may have, I have a feeling Mr. Buer is going to be involved here shortly. So back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Questions from Ms. Spear or Mr. Buer? We've seen much of this before, obviously. Not seeing hands go up. You've either explained it very well or confused us completely.
Well, if there's no discussion, what we will
Mr.
do.
Whalen has a question.
Okay.
Well, a couple of things on the duplex and triplex in the R zones. I don't recall sitting here what the Planning Commission's recommendation was, if any, on that. And then on the climate change, there was a lot of great work done. And you know, perhaps I'm inclined to let the Planning Commission chew on it for the next cycle before we adopt the entirety of that chapter, because it was very, very thorough. Well done, but I'm but one lone voice here, so I open that up for discussion. But as to the duplex triplex issue, Tiffany, can you give us a little bit of further background?
Well, the Planning Commission did recommend allowing them in the R1 through R4 zone. There was discussion about the fact that it wouldn't be a quote free for all, meaning the density limitations within those zones is going to limit the amount of redevelopment that can happen, because the density for each of the zones is not changing. The uses are allowed, but in order to provide for actually on the ground new development, you would have to have enough acreage assembled to be able to get the density that you would need. So with that, the Planning Commission did recommend that it go forward.
Great.
Let's see, Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, because I was the one that kind of made the noise about it last time. So are we required to allow this by state law? The duplex, triplex, quadplex?
If it's not an explicit statutory requirement, it will be probably in the next legislative cycle. I think it was raised as part of one of the bills this time that didn't move forward. But at the same time, you have guidance at the regional level that this type of development should be allowed within residential zones. So for instance, Vision 2050 and multi-county planning policies are now suggesting this, as well as any sort of statutory discussion.
So, okay, so we're kind of making an assumption that the legislature is going to pass this at some point in the future, but we don't know what that RCW will say.
Correct.
Okay.
I will say that
And
it'll
so-
be in the near future, probably.
Okay. Okay. So I thank you for the information that you put together on very short notice on the various pieces of property that would be affected or wouldn't be affected, and how they might be affected. And I do appreciate it, because I think it shows why this is problematic, right? You have one section of town or one block that just decided that way back when they're going to slap a thing on there, and it can only be single family houses, and that's the way forever. And I don't know how many more, which is interesting, because we can have state laws that tell us that you have to have apartments everywhere or duplexes everywhere, but they're somehow exempt. Then I do worry about design standards, and I don't want to put anything into effect until we have design standards. And so I think that it's problematic that, and I do appreciate the breadth of properties that you picked, but the fact that some people can have these underlying items, and then, well, we're exempt from that, and then there's equity issues, because they don't have proper roads, folks in one part of town will be exempt also. And I just found it to be problematic. I think that this is something that even if the legislature passes it, I think this is one of those items that the legislature will be. I don't know what they're going to do, but they really do need to think about the equity of this thing, right? That there's underlying items and things that are going to protect some neighborhoods, and other neighborhoods are going to get chopped up pretty good. And especially if somebody can assemble two houses or two lots, right? And then they could put any number of these in. I don't think we fully understand what the true impacts will be to Lakewood. I think that they'll be a lot more impactful in Lakewood than they will in other communities. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to talk to our legislative delegation about, because some of them don't live in Lakewood. And so they're going to have to understand that there's ramifications to our communities. And so I don't think jumping out ahead on this, I guess I'm looking for, why is it necessary to jump out ahead on this? What do we get from jumping out ahead on this? Do we get paid $1 million or by PSRC, or what is the advantage to moving out ahead on it? And are we prepared to get that phone call? Why is somebody building a triplex next to my house?
Mm-hmm.
And to rent it out? I also think that the legislature, when we talk to them next year, I worry about that in the rush to try to create more housing, there is a little bit of naivety towards where the rental housing market's going and how it's working. And you read, there's a lot of articles right now out there all over the place about how rental housing has become a national business. And there are people living in different parts of the country that are doing this. So I think if they put their blinders on and say, we just need more housing, but they don't realize that the impact of what this kind of stuff is going to do, that the people who own these properties or buy up 4 or 5 lots and suddenly put in 15 units don't care, right? They don't care. They're going to be investment people. They're going to be from New York in some cases. If it's BlackRock or one of their groups, there's really a lot of problems and potential just unforeseen consequences of this type of activity. And I think before we headlong rush into it, and I would say the same thing to the legislature, understand who's going to make money off this thing, right? Who's going to win on this thing, and who's going to pick up the costs, right? So will it really produce more low-income housing or missing middle housing? I don't know that that's proven to be true. So I'll just leave that there. I am opposed to this legislation, and I'll be honest with you. If the state requires it, then we need to have another discussion, and we're going to really have to start thinking about some things about how we want to approach this kind of housing. Because we've already agreed. I'll point out to the council, we've already talked about cottage housing, right? We've approved a cottage housing ordinance. We've approved the downtown plan is chock full of different kinds of housing that would be allowed. That the Lakewood Station plan is chock full of high density housing. We have bonuses embedded now, and PDD bonuses embedded in I think every residential area. So I think we're rushing it. I don't think I have the consequences, and I think we need to make sure our legislators understand that there may be some unforeseen consequences also.
Right, Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am of a similar mind to Mr. Boki. We got ahead of ourselves by even putting this on the docket because we read the tea leaves and said the legislature is going to make this mandatory in the section that just included. And I'm not sure that the legislature is actually going to keep going in that direction to do that. The sense of the discussions in the legislature around housing this past time really were, they want to encourage and suggest things, but that they got a lot of feedback from statewide mandatory solutions around housing as opposed to local control of those things is not going to work. In 2019, the legislature started down this with a group of legislators from King County that had a laundry list of things they wanted to mandate. And that got, I'll say, watered down or reduced down to some legislation that said encourage, and there was a list of things that were encouraged. And we, in fact, had been doing or did some of those encouraged things. So moving forward and beginning to use form-based zoning, looking at making modifications around parking requirements close to transit centers, that using sub-area plans, making it easier for ADUs to be done. And this particular item of allow duplexes and triplexes in all zoning areas was on that encouraged list, but it didn't make it to you have to do this list. that I think that maybe we thought that they were going to move it into that have to do it this past time, and they didn't. In fact, the legislature really seemed more inclined to recognizing, as Mr. Boki talked, that locally the impacts of different initiatives were better assessed to be able to go and do that, as long as long-term growth goals and affordability goals could be met. And I think we in Lakewood are in a position of where we do better than most communities at remaining affordable in the rental housing market. And we have been seeing in our R1 through R4 zones, particularly the R2 and 3 zones, a good deal of new home development that is going on. And that's replacing some of the housing that we were middle to, where there are places above a starter home for folks to move to and be able to go and do that. And I also think that this is the wrong year to do something that has the potential to be really impactful on the nature of neighborhoods. Because this was a year of where you really couldn't aggressively get out and get input from the community because of COVID, being able to go and do that. And the fact that we had public hearings are not really the wherewithal to do it. And I think particularly if we start going to say that we want to develop design standards, that's going to need a lot of public input. Because as we saw when we wanted to put streetlights in a neighborhood in Oak Brook, design standards were very important in terms of people being concerned about what that would look like. So I think that, I would propose that we disapprove this amendment, this cycle. That we certainly wait until the next time to see what exactly the legislature actually does in terms of mandating things. But we don't wait for that to begin to talk with some of our neighborhoods about would they like to see this and what kind of design standards and things that they are. I think we can begin to have those discussions without it having to be formally a proposed going on, but can be a longer term planning piece. Or that really we just move on to the next neighborhood of the city that we're going to do a sub-area plan for in the next 4 or 5 years. Because I think we have been advised that even though there are long-term growth goals that we are being asked to meet, and to some extent think that they are, we have been told that with our planning work efforts to date, particularly with the sub-area plans and that our current zoning structure, if built out, gets us to meeting those goals. So we're not under a pressure to do something that will change that in the immediacy. And I think the community would appreciate us going slow in this regard, because it is be so impactful to the nature of the neighborhoods in the city. So when it comes time to deal with this thing, I'm certainly going to be supportive of disapproving this particular comprehensive plan amendment.
Personally, I concur with Mr. Bulkey. I might not be kicking and screaming, but I'm going to be drug into allowing duplexes and triplexes in R1 through R3 areas so as proposed. You know, we had a number of comments related and perhaps uninformed as to the existing Lakewood tree ordinance as to what happens if somebody is allowed to commercially develop a property where our tree ordinance applies. There has to be mitigation, there's protections. Remember, if I recall correctly, if you're 17,000 square feet or less, the tree ordinance doesn't apply. And we could be killing our canopy, death literally by 1,000 cuts if you allow infill development to increase the density in the areas that are forested in Lakewood, whether that's around the lakes or Oak Brook or I think that's just an example of the unintended consequences that could come from rushing into such a policy. We'd have to have a coordinated effort to revise our tree ordinance, which then again would have some unpleasant consequences for property owners. So I'm of the go very slow mind on this. Anything further, Ms. Spear?
No, if there's no other questions, you just expect next Monday night, then the ordinance to take action. We'll have all of the proposed amendments, and then it'll be a matter of making them, all of the proposed comprehensive plan amendments, and it'll be up to the council to take action to remove or edit as desired. So you'll have that in your packet. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Branstetter?
I had just one further question regarding the environmental chapter and the planning commission's desire to say that they want us to, they recommended approving it, but with a proviso that revisions to it and review of it be on next year's docket. And I guess my question for Ms. Spear or Mr. Buer is, would we not accomplish the same thing by just moving this amendment, rather than approving it this year, moving it forward to next year's docket and letting the planning commission take the time they feel they really need but didn't have to be able to work through it? Is that an option that would accomplish what the planning commission desires?
I think that's certainly an option the council could take. I believe in Mr. Buer's mind, the reason for working to have this adopted this year rather than continuing it in its entirety to the next cycle, for instance, was that there actually is some funding available to start implementation if we do it sooner. But I'll turn that over to him to answer more fully.
A couple of things I'd like to comment upon. If the council wishes to adopt the climate change chapter, several council members have suggested a series of amendments, and all of them are very good ones. But if you choose to go that direction, we are not going to be ready for taking action at your next regular meeting. It's going to take staff some time to go through all that and make all the necessary changes. And I would indicate to you, to the council, that my understanding with talking with Department of Commerce is that if you did have a climate change chapter available, it could open up opportunities for additional funding that may not be there if you did not have a document there. I don't think that the commission is that far off in what the desire is. If you take a look at many of the comments that I've gotten from council members, they reflect perhaps some of the changes that the commission was considering. The other option too is to tell the planning commission to focus on putting together a 5-year plan, taking the document as it exists with any modifications proposed by the council, letting them take a look at the 89+ implementation measures and indicate to the council as a recommendation specific items that you wish to be addressed over the next 5 years, just like we would do for a transportation improvement plan or a parks and recreation master plan. So that would be my recommendation. Give us a little bit more time to answer the questions the council has provided to us. Go through and make the changes that I've heard from council members, and I'm anticipating that you would all agree with them. And then as a part of any recommended action, request the City Planning Commission to put together a capital improvement plan for climate change over 5 years.
Is there any objection from council pushing that? Oh, excuse me, Mr. Branstetter. Is there any objection from council to considering pushing this forward to allow for the amendments to be incorporated before it's considered?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Branstetter.
Right, that's it. So I want to clarify that then it would not be on our agenda next week to approve.
That's correct. The staff does not have the time to go through and edit the document to incorporate all the council members' comments appropriately. I will like to comment that the comments we received from Linda Farmer and Mike Branstetter were excellent, and they're worthy of amendment. And I think the council would appreciate the document in its entirety with those changes.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions on this subject? If not, we'll move to reports by the city manager, Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Just 4 updates I'd like to share with the Council this evening. The first is the Association of Washington Cities, AWC. They announced their 8th annual City Champion Award winners, which typically go to elected leaders who work in support of many city issues that the state legislature deals with every year. And however, this year, our very own city attorney, Heidi Walkner, has been recognized as an all-star for her work during the last session, and specifically it was in support of SB 5476 and the Blake decision regarding the impacts on municipal courts from that decision. And Ms. Walkner, I can tell you, she not only she testified, but she had a number of meetings with a number of stakeholders, including state legislators, her colleagues, AWC, and many others, and was instrumental in taking the lead in offering advice on how to amend the legislation that resulted in 5476 ultimately being adopted, which in the end also minimized the impact on cities and municipal courts. So not only do we recognize all the work that she did internally, but of course also AWC is doing that with their City Champion Award. So I just wanted to publicly recognize Ms. Walkner, our great city attorney, for her work there. Last week, we learned that the House in Congress, they passed the Invest in America Act, and it also included a set aside for infrastructure funding, transportation funding for medium-sized cities with a population of 10,000 to 75,000. And as you know, this has been a key federal priority for this city for a number of years. And we are certainly grateful to Congressman Rick Larsen, who has been taking the lead on this for well over a decade now, to try and create this new program again for federal funding for medium-sized cities. And also our very own Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, who also sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, along with Congressman Larsen, for her support in doing this. Also, the city of Lakewood, again, played a very, very instrumental role in getting this legislation across the finish line, if you will. We partnered with a couple of other cities, and we were able to get a letter of support that went to the committee, signed by, I think it was the final count was 33 cities, primarily here in Washington State, but also in Oregon. And we had to do that with a turnaround of literally just a handful of days, just the way things were working. So some very good news there. So again, it's passed out of the House. So now it will head over to the Senate. And then, of course, ultimately, hopefully the president will sign it. One of the caveats is that the president has introduced his own bill. So we're not quite sure how it's all going to come together. But again, the good news is that this amendment, again, creating federal transportation funding opportunities for medium-sized cities, is now moving forward. So we are extremely grateful for that. And then lastly, I'd just like to mention the Washington State Redistricting Commission is beginning some outreach meetings, including one here in Pierce County that is scheduled for, for the 10th Congressional District, the whole area that the 10th Congressional District covers, which includes Lakewood and our 2 state legislative districts. So the Redistricting Commission will be looking at not just the redistricting of the congressional districts, but also the state ones as well. The meeting has been rescheduled to June 22nd, which is a week from tomorrow on a Tuesday from 7:30 to 9. It is a virtual meeting. And it is recommended that a representative of this body do testify. We are working on some talking points. And right now there's no new proposed boundaries. And the reason being is because the Census Bureau still does not have their final population estimates. And those are expected not to be available until September 30th. And then the Redistricting Commission will then have between September 30th and November 15th to finalize all of that. But between now and then, again, they are doing some wide range community outreach to seek feedback. I think, the feedback that this city wants to provide is we really like having 2 state legislative districts, the 28th and the 29th. We are well served by them. I think one of the things that we don't want to see is Lakewood kind of carved out and being represented by 3 or even 4 legislative districts. And so I think at the very least, it would be good to talk with the commission about that and just, talk about the value of being served by 2 legislative districts. So if the council has any interest in commenting on that, we can certainly help coordinate and get you signed up for that. But again, we are working on some talking points for you if you are so interested. So with that, that's my report.
Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? Well, then we'll go to council comments. Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'd like to congratulate Heidi on her being recognized. Good job. We are proud of you. We're thankful for what you do. And on tomorrow, I will be attending a change of command for the 62nd Airlift Wing on McCourt Field. That's it.
Mr. Ranstetter.
Yeah, I would also congratulate Ms. Walker on being recognized for what she has done for many years, but particularly for this year. And other than that, that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to congratulate Ms. Wachter, and her name is renowned throughout the land. Other cities speak very highly of her too, so she's well deserved.
Ms. Farmer.
I will happily pile on the compliments. Ms. Wachter, well done, well deserved. I wanted to mention that I thought the Clover Park School District did a fantastic job with the Hutloff Middle School drive-through graduation. And here's hoping for an actual in-person graduation next year. This week is a busy week with the AWC Large City Advisory meeting on Thursday in the morning, followed by a 3-hour sex offender policy board meeting in the afternoon, followed by that evening a Pierce County Regional Council meeting. So it's going to be a very busy day. That's my report. Thank you.
Mr. Wilkie.
Struggling here. Yeah, congratulations, Ms. Wachter, on that, and thank you for your recent work also on some legal things that helped the city. I believe helped the city and helped other folks in other cities. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to the new year, or to the grand opening. I think we're waiting for July 1st. So, and I think everything is open. And so my question to the city manager, to the mayor, I guess, is, are we planning to be in person on July, whatever it'll be, a little like what, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th? Or is that is the 5th a holiday? So we will be in person on the 6th. So that'll be our first. So we're going to be in person on July 6th, and that's just great. And then are we still going to continue? Is the plan still continue to allow citizen participation via Zoom? And that's a thumbs up too. Okay, great. You're just answering all the right questions, City Manager Caulfield. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bell, did I call on you? I thought so. Mr. Whalen, I get, it's not like Hollywood Squares. People move around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, and apologies for being a little bit late tonight. I was at the Pierce Transit Commission meeting that started at 4 and didn't end until a little bit after 6. Of note is the funding that's been received or will be received for the BRT process down from the transit center out to Spanaway area, and that will be a very lengthy process. And then we'll yield way for the BRT2 to hopefully happen down the road to Lakewood. There are 2 potential pathways for that, more to follow. They did retain a consulting firm to study those additional options. So Mr. Caulfield will probably want to stay on top of that to make sure that we get it down the right path that makes sense for Lakewood. And then the other thing is Sue Dreyer, the CEO, as many of you know, is retiring. She's retiring effectively today, but she will probably come back as a contract employee for a period of time to transition a new CEO yet to be named. And so that will happen as well. Thursday is a Pierce County Regional Council. I will be attending that. And what else we got going on? Seems like never-ending Zoom meetings. I look forward to seeing you all in person on the 6th of July.
Thank you. Let's see. Tuesday, we had coffee with the mayor on SSNCP. I'm going to join Ms. Moss tomorrow in attending the 62nd Air Wing change of command. I would note that often when attorneys get recognition, it's in the Bar Journal and it's a disciplinary notice. So it's great to see Ms. Wachter get positive recognition. And that's a segue into the Bar Journal this month had a feature article authored by our own Judge Mansfield on Justice Gonzalez and his elevation to Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court. She did an excellent job. And so if you know a lawyer, try to intercept that before it goes in the trash and read what she wrote. Is there anything further to come before the council?
It's a great article. I'm not a lawyer, and I found it really, really just well written and just informative.
I rarely read the articles in the Bar Journal. I turn to the back and see who died, and that. But this is this stopped. I kind of stopped and spent the time to read it. It was well worth the time. Anything further? And we're adjourned.
Thank you.